So I am reading Atlas Shrugged, and I got to this part where Francisco is talking to Dagny. So my question will actually be about judgment and courage. And so keep that in mind as we go through this section, and then I discuss my question. So I titled this section, "The Courage to Step Out on a New Road, to Act on a New Idea, or to Apply a New Concept based on One's Own Judgment."
Yep.
So if you want to just read this, maybe it'll be easier to do that than I read it out loud to you.
I'll just read it really quick.
Sure.
Yeah, I read it.
So I wanted to analyze the fear involved when stepping out on a new path.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you live in a religious household and there is something off, or you feel that there is something off in some of the philosophical beliefs you are taught. But if you did not have access to other philosophers, it would be much more difficult to step out on your own and say, I disagree with this and I will now act on my new belief, right?
Yes.
First, say,
Right.
if you read 5 or 10 different incredibly intelligent philosophers who were all backing up what you felt was true, it would be much easier, right?
It would be easier, yes.
Yeah. And so what I want to analyze is, what is the fear based on when you're stepping out on a new road, or when you've formed a new concept and you are then applying it as he speaks about in this scenario? If I'm applying objectivist epistemology, let's say, to that fear, then I got stuck because I'm thinking, well, does it make sense to say you might be wrong? If you've applied a process of reason and you've validated it, then might would be arbitrary. So what would be the basis for the fear? Fear would be based on the estimate that there may be some loss to your value or threat to your life, let's say, because you're acting on a new judgment, you're implementing some new scientific concept, you're getting on a train that no one else has ridden on before. But if you apply the objectivist epistemology, then what would be the origin of that fear if it was rational? Why, or where am I going wrong in my thinking here?
Okay, so you're wondering about fear to act into the unknown.
Not into the unknown, to act on your own judgment.
Okay.
And the act is not one that has been performed before, and the judgment is not one that has been made before, at least to your knowledge. And so the fear is the stepping out onto the new road, to the putting into practice a new idea which no one has affirmed for you. It is purely based on your own reasoning.
Okay.
If you, by the way, I have, like, this notepad is full of tons of questions. So if you feel like it's not one that you want to tackle now, we can always keep moving on.
Okay, I'll just raise a few questions about this. I don't know if I'll answer, but like this is how I would approach it. Well, for one, why did you just say what is the fear based on? And why did you choose the word fear here? Like that, why is that the essence of your question?
When I read about courage, I thought of fear, because I understand courage to refer to an action you need to summon up, or an action you need to will in the face of in the face of an emotion, in the face of fear, when pursuing a value. So because that's what I think of courage as, I then thought, okay, well, if one needs to will courage to act on their judgment, what is the fear? But maybe my understanding or conceptualization then of courage is wrong. But every time I think of courage, the associations I summon up, putting aside the definition for now, all involve fear of some sort in the face of pursuing a value.
Okay. We might not want to say fear here, because I imagine you could say somebody's afraid to take that path, or somebody might even be just uncertain. I would say, I mean, it's all fear, uncertainty, or anyway, we could focus on what are we talking about here? We're talking about some um, deliberate reason to act in a new way, choosing deliberately as opposed to just a guess or a seeming or approximations. That what does it matter to have certainty? I don't know if fear is really the important part of the question. I understand why you phrase it that way, but I think it'd be better to phrase it more like what leads somebody to be courageous, like more in the positive sense here, since it's all about courage. Say, well, why is somebody courageous? I mean, it'd be hard to answer in the negative, like, why are people afraid? Well, I don't know, but at least you can see what Rand's claiming here about being courageous to say. She's saying it's something about being certain. It's about saying it is rather than it might be. And it could be that it's a thing that you've had to always do even since the beginning of time. And it's even expressed in the skyscrapers. So you could think of, why is Rand saying the skyscrapers represent courage? And
Are you asking? Oh, sorry, continue.
well, I guess that's more rhetorical, actually. But it's more thinking in those terms, I think. Like, what does it mean to be courageous? I think you're right to question what is your understanding of courage. I think this passage is more about courage than it is about fear. And you can see implicitly, probably, it's like identification, like identifying facts of the world, being certain, understanding reason. It seems all implicit in what she's saying here. That's the nature of courage, to recognize that there's things you must do just by the nature of things. It's not maybe, it's a definite. Acting with certainty, acting with conviction, perhaps.
That's why I wrote down revisit the essence of courage, because courage to me means an act in the face of the emotion of fear. And so because I consider an essence of courage to be fear, that's why I thought about this as a question.
Okay.
But maybe I need to revisit and rethink what courage is.
Yeah, and we'll move on from here. I
Sounds
think that's
good to
what
me.
you need to do. Next question.
What do you think of this phrase, fear of the unknown? I have my own view, but I'm keen to hear yours.
I always think of Dune, like that phrase about fear is a mind killer. There's a whole. I mean, you should look that passage up.
I know it.
Yeah, that's what I think of always.
Tell me why you think of that.
Because I think of one that fears, it destroys rational thought. In the face of fear, you can't think. Inability to think, inability to think calmly and with certainty.
Okay. We'll move on.
Like uncertainties in a way is what destroys your mind. That you don't know what's true. You don't know how to act with certainty. It's just all just avoidance.
Does uncertainty relate to the Dune quote? Because I don't remember thinking of fear
It's
as
just an association I make, but
it's an association. Okay.
yeah, it's what fear is a mind killer. It'd be like it encourages avoidance rather than seeking something out.
Okay.
It's like the reverse of goal-oriented action. It's like goal avoidance in a way.
Right. Okay. You can read this and then we will discuss.
Okay.
So do you think that, does my question make sense? Can you hate something that you value? If you're doing something and you're spending, let's say you're working in a job you hate, and for whatever reason you stay there for a long period of time.
Yeah.
What I'm confused by is that on the one hand here we're saying that means you value the job that much, but then you hate your job, so you hate what you value. And then I'm in a confusion, because how can you hate what you value?
I mean, I agree with the line there. Like, you are valuing it to that extent, at least, that it's providing something, at least to that extent. Like, it provides some value. To say you hate it, I think, is maybe excessive, even. Like, I mean, I guess it could, in a metaphorical sense, you hate it, but if you truly did hate it, you'd leave it. I mean, that's the way I think it. If you did hate, in the sense that if hate refers to saying I don't value anything about it, then no, you can't hate anything that you value. If hate just means I get very little value, almost none, but I get some, but I mean, sure, then that could work.
Okay.
I think hate people usually mean to say that they get next to no value. Not that there is no value, but almost none. I mean, that's the way I've seen it used mostly. But maybe that's imprecision. I think it'd be a better way outlook on life just to say that you don't value it much. To say you hate it is a bit, I would argue, is pessimistic. Like, it's viewing things in a negative light, even though it's just like you don't value it much. It doesn't mean it's ruining your life. It's just not that great. It's just bland, I guess you could say.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. Okay. I've skimmed through Teaching Johnny to Think,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to ask you about your own thoughts on some of the content. So he advocates studying maths and science as forming as a base for a proper education, I guess proper being what he considers essential to the development of a conceptual faculty. And I don't know how exactly you determine what is the right amount and how you develop a conceptual faculty, but somehow he's come up with his own view of what it is. I mean, I didn't follow all of it. I didn't read all of it in detail, but what do you think of, if one wants to improve their thinking, then mathematics and science, so physics, as providing both the content and the methods for thinking? And I ask because what I'm thinking about is my own experience studying economics, where it was so wishy-washy and there was no respect for any sort of hierarchical approach to the study of a subject, and definitions were all over the place. And so if you begin studying a subject like that, I don't know if you necessarily take away abstract tools that are generalizable to other fields. Whereas I can see the possibility that if one had a good education in mathematics and science, for example, specifically in physics, one could then take certain fundamental or foundational tools and generalize them across many different subjects, make the modifications or changes where necessary, but come away with something that actually works. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on these two specifically, on maths and science, and their value in possibly developing someone's thought process and ability to solve problems of all kinds.
For one, I'd say that to answer that, you need developmental psychology. I don't think you could do that just through through philosophy. I mean, you could recognize through philosophy that you could teach methods, okay. But I think beyond that, whether should you teach math, should you teach science, should you teach economics, I think that would really depend on the developmental psychology literature. What I know about that kind of literature, it is better, it is right to teach them a method of thinking. That is the right attitude, that it does predict better outcomes in school, in college, no matter what background you have, like whatever culture you're part of. Like you have to teach them empirical things, like teaching the basics of science. Getting usually it's a matter of getting them children to ask questions about what they observe and see and touch. Like very basic questions, like you can ask them to touch I don't know, a handful of sand, ask them to describe it, talk about it, what happens when you drop it, or things like that. That's kind of thing is very helpful for early childhood development. Really focusing on the empirical stuff first. It doesn't. I would disagree that math is more later down the line. Say, let's say kindergarten. You would begin with basic empirical stuff like, oh, look at the way this ball moves, or really getting them to help learn how to focus on the world around them and build from there. And that's definitely proven to be very helpful and consistent with objectivist epistemology as well, in the sense that all knowledge is built up from perceptual, from first level concepts, right? Especially observational and measuring things or measurement and just noticing perception. That's critical to developing a good, strong conceptual faculty. And from there, you could teach maybe math or economics or physics. I don't think it matters which one. They're all essentially quite mathematical. But I think going in that order is the ideal way to teach somebody to think.
Okay, so just to recap, this is for developmental psychology to decide. However, would you agree that the role philosophy would play would be in determining those subjects which approach things in a logical way? For example, having studied some economics and forgotten a lot of it, I do remember there was some really weird, strange, nonsensical things I learned that I don't know if I think they hampered my thinking as opposed to improved my thinking. And that's not to say the whole field is a null, but it does seem like, especially in macroeconomics, there's a lot of strange definitions. And I can't recall a specific example, but there was just a lot of approaches that they did not teach me to think inductively or teach in a logical way. Yeah. To the extent that I can think now, it has been simply because of philosophy.
Yeah, I would say philosophy would help identify like levels of abstraction, what kinds of abstractions you can deal with, or what is perceptual and what is not. Things like that. I don't think it can determine exactly the process that's most effective, but it can identify that what the order of development might be generally. That all knowledge is built up from perception. You could, by identifying that, you can acknowledge that therefore you need some sort of empirical or observational field to begin with, or beginning with skills with observation and building up from there. At least if that philosophical theory is correct, that's what we would then assume. As opposed to say if Kant was right about conceptual development, which I don't really know that much about, but I think it'd be more like that you could just start out with math and purely without empirical stuff, because no knowledge isn't based on perception. It's based on these, I don't know, abstract models within your mind. And that would recommend a different way of approaching this. But at least as far as objectivism goes, and even what I know about developmental psychology, this sort of way is best. That perception really is the groundwork for everything else.
So just to recap again, would you agree with me that, so I understand what you're saying, and I agree part of determining what subjects are appropriate for someone to study would be answered by development psychology, because developmental psychology, because there may be specialized needs or optimizations you can make to each individual, and that requires the specialized study of developmental psychology. For example, art may play a large role, or music may play a large role depending on the person.
Right.
But the role of philosophy would then be to say something like, well, let's rule out economics because of all the garbage methods that are in macroeconomics that may mess up someone's method of thinking. And let's rule out witchcraft because that's also not conducive to developing a good method of thinking. So developmental psychology in picking the specific subjects, and then philosophy in delimiting the range of subjects. Would you agree with that conceptualization? Yes. Okay, perfect.
I agree with that.
All right, cool. And I just want to point out as well, something I've been thinking about, and then if you've got any additional thoughts, I'm not, I was thinking about Jews and how they make up 20% of the Nobel prize winners, and yet they are some small portion of the population, and specifically Ashkenazi Jews. And I was curious about, and I asked someone who is a rabbi actually about this, and he didn't give me a clear answer, but Maimonides, who is one of the more significant contributors to Jewish thought and interpretation methods, is largely influenced by Aristotle, at least in a significant portion. And I wondered if there was some causal link, possible causal link in that, that it's not genetic. The link is in the methods of teaching and the influence of Maimonides, who was Aristotelian. So that's one possible curiosity. And then Musk also talks about first principles, which he got that from physics, and physics got it from Aristotle.
Yeah.
And he's obviously an effective thinker. And then there's Da Vinci too. And so anyway, I don't know if there was a question there. It's just some curious observations that I thought of.
Yeah, always the first principle is like always a thing that's so appealing to me. Like anyone that talks, and like anyone even says first principles, like, oh, I like him. Like I'll know immediately if I like somebody and what they're going to recommend or something like that. It's like it makes my ears perk up.
Got it. Cool. Okay, next question. Jumping subject completely, but I think you'll like this. I wanted to know what your thoughts and methods were for copying an author's style, even if it's for the purpose of communication, just because you like the way they speak, you like the way they think, you like their descriptions. And I'll give you some examples. So here's some that I copied, just random phrases or descriptions that I copied from texts that I really liked. And we can go through them quickly and then discuss methods for copying them. So if you want to just read through these, and then I really love this description, and then I'll ask you more questions. Yeah. So what are your thoughts on how would you internalize these things and make them yours? Like some of them it's hard to then you identify, okay, I really like this. I like this way of communicating. I like these descriptions. How would you then go about almost copying them and somehow internalizing them? Because obviously it's hard you're not often going to be presented with a situation where you might use the description spiritual drug dealer, or you can't copy this whole descriptive passage word for word. But if there's something beautiful you find in it, how would you extract it and then make it yours and internalize it? Have you given any thought to something like that?
So like for just writing style, like as fiction writing style, for example.
Yes. And also communication, maybe. I mean, obviously in communication, you're not going to necessarily say an antediluvian landscape, but you may, for example, I don't know, use spiritual drug deal or something more, like whatever's more conversational in the phrases you pick out, you might then internalize into conversation. But with the rest of them, which are fairly literary and descriptive, yes, into fiction or into just poetry. how would you copy them and make them yours? Just as you'd learn music and you copy, you begin by copying others before you produce something creative and new.
Go back to the top because with Atlas Shrugged up there, because I could give a better example with that passage.
Okay.
Because it's more relates to the way I've adapted my own writing style. Like when I was looking at this, there's a certain way of describing here that I kind of do in my own writing. And I'm sure I've picked it up from Rand because I've read Atlas Shrugged and that's had a big influence on my writing. Let's say, as far as copying, it's not so much copying as much as identifying techniques used or habits the writer uses. Like the way Rand here she gets into like psychological stuff quite easily. Like he said, he knew what he saw, what he thought, what he wanted, he did not say, blah, blah, blah. That's something I would do sometimes. Like I would go into the psychology of their thinking, even though it's the opposite of show, don't tell. That's telling, it's not showing, which some writers say that they don't do that ever. But I break that rule kind of easily. I don't really care. I do prefer to show usually, but that's something I might copy in a sense that I reacted well to it and I like that idea, so I do that too. Like I'll say something the character does, then say some psychology about their thinking. I would say something descriptive, then I go into their psychology. That's a pattern I've adopted. I think Rand follows that pattern a lot. It's hard to describe what the process of copying is. It'd be better to say the essential of it, I think, is recognizing something somebody else does that you want to do. You have to recognize what you want to copy first, of course. And then you just do it. You just take something about it and copy the form. Say the way I described, you get like some action, some psychology. Like I have a general form in my head. So I know in my head how to write things like that. I sometimes think of paragraphs in that way. For writing characters, I might do that. For writing acting scenes, it's very different. So, go to the other passage you had below. The original one. See, this reminds me a bit of the poem, whatever you want to call that. It reminds me of William Gibson. It's very stream of consciousness.
Which one are you looking at?
His thoughts, the fleeting shadows of delirium, Mexican sky hangs. That's the style of William Gibson. It's a lot very stream of consciousness, very associative. And I've adapted that style too, because I like that style a lot. So I just knew to try association, just like I could think Mexican sky. I associate with maybe something like Aztecs and maybe otherworldliness. The spiritual drug dealers like an association. So it's like teaching me like keep association sometimes. Use associative thinking when describing. I guess it's kind of vague to say that, but essentially what I'm saying here is that I identify some aspect of the writing that I like and I just copy the form, the general form of it.
Yeah, I understand. So you extract what you identify as the principle behind the writing, and then you try and apply that. Would you say initially the application is forced in that it may be out of place, but you're really trying to integrate that style, and so you force it in all kinds of places?
I think so. I think that's just the learning process. Perfect. It does start a bit stilted.
Perfect.
And then you develop your own style from there.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if you've got comments or specific resources you can think of for this. I may have asked you, so if I haven't, we can skip it, but principles for selecting a purpose, because there's different approaches to this. So if I've often seen a quote by Steve Jobs, and he says, you can only connect the dots backwards, meaning he didn't have a vision. He didn't have some grand purpose. He just did things he liked. And then it all seemed to add up to some integration when he looked back at what he did. So that's one approach. And then another approach is simply, I guess this is similar, but looking just simply at a next step. What do I like? Okay, let me take a small step towards that. Versus, say, someone who does have this grand vision earlier on, like, Ayn Rand would be a good example. She wanted to create, her mission and life was orientated around the purpose of creating through fiction what she perceived to be the ideal man. And that would be what I term looking forward. And so I'm just curious how much has been written about this. And then that's the first question. The next part is separate. So yeah.
I don't know actually any writing on it.
Okay. What about principles for weighing values then? I don't find comparing values to be easy. I don't find it something, even if I just go, okay, what do I value more, this or this? It's not like, this feeling has a higher intensity, therefore it is a higher value. Like, that doesn't work.
I wish I had better answers for that other than you just have to keep looking. I mean, in a way I could say wouldn't helped me. I mean, I know at least as far as identifying or weighing values, reading Nietzsche influenced me for that. Like ways to think about values. He didn't really give methods, of course, but it gave me questions to ask and what I want to ask when I'm considering what's a bigger or better value than another.
Okay, so I would say if you've got questions, that's almost at least the beginning of a method.
Yes, right. But I don't know anything more particular than that.
Okay.
Other than the books I recommended already.
All right.
But nothing focused on just that.
Okay.
Except Viable Values, maybe, by Tara Smith, but nothing else.
Right. Have you read Viktor Frankl's book, The Search for Meaning?
No.
Okay. Are you familiar with him at all?
I don't think so.
Okay. He wrote a book about his experience in the concentration camps of the Holocaust. And he was a psychotherapist. And he wrote about what kept him alive through the experience and what I think he described as what gave the experience meaning. And I think there were a few answers he gave. So one was the hope that his wife were alive. The second one was his work and desire to complete an idea he was developing in psychotherapy. And the third one was what he said, God. So the idea of God is what kept him alive. And he writes about people losing their meaning orientation and then essentially giving up in the concentration camps. And what I was thinking about is, it seems like often, at least he said this, often what kept people going through, if this is accurate, what kept people persisting to survive and remain meaning orientated was their belief in God. And so I was wondering, for someone who doesn't believe in God, it seems like there would be nothing to keep you going through that experience unless maybe someone who read a lot of literature that portrayed different alternatives of reality as possible. Unless someone like that may have persisted through a difficult period because he was able to see that alternatives exist and may be possible. And so the experience is worth suffering through just to see if you can make it to the other end and something in another world does come about. So, I mean, I was thinking of literature as an alternative to God, but I'm not sure if you have thoughts on this, but if you do, I'd love to hear them.
Just that I think the only way to find a meaning through that without just throwing your principles and just saying, oh, I believe in God, I think the best just to focus on, I think all anybody could do is focus on the joy of being alive, that being alive itself is its own reward, or even outside of recognizing that if you made it through whatever horror you're going through, I would argue that the joy of being alive is all you would need. Like that's motivation enough. It's a tough topic because in that situation, we're talking about like the complete obliteration of any context where morality applies. There's no reason, purpose, or self-esteem. It's all been destroyed. Like your nature as a person is denied completely. And I would wonder what you could even attain. I would almost wonder if it doesn't even matter what you think because your life is already dead and ended already. There's nothing left of it. Like it doesn't matter if you lie to yourself or not. It's over. But I think maybe you could think in terms of purely sense of life, that you would just have this feeling that it feels right to be alive and that being alive is its own reward. But I don't think you can give like a moral foundation for that because the whole context of morality has been destroyed anyway.
Okay.
Like morality is supposed to apply to like seeking values and seeking things out and the potential to act within your judgment, at least to some extent.
Okay. There's a lot of references in Atlas Shrugged to not expecting disaster and perceiving pain to be an accident. And that's an interesting sense of life to me. It's different from mine. Do you know much about how to think about the mights that are negative? For example, I might die tomorrow. Metaphysically, that's possible. But there's like, I don't know if I don't really know about ways to think about this. Like, should that just not be in one's focus? And has there been much written about that to reorient oneself to have a kind of more what I guess you'd call a sunlit sense of life, as opposed to one that is focused heavily on disasters and things that exist but are heavily negative? And so, thoughts on that?
I know some psychology literature on this sort of question. Like, what is more likely to give meaning or lead to happiness, or what people judge as more happy or something like that. I think there's an example of um, there's a study where I can't think of it offhand. I'll link the article to you.
Okay.
I'll have to look it up later.
Any literature you can think of as well?
Do not expect disaster. No.
Okay.
But I do like that idea of like thinking of like suffering as an accident. It's not the way it's meant to be. I think it's very powerful to acknowledge that there's a way to overcome your own suffering, or acknowledge that whatever does occur, it's not that it wasn't caused by your doing. And not only that, but your actions can go against it. Recognizing that, or at least goal oriented action is really what your focus is on. That your focus is put on what you can do and what you choose to do, and regarding anything else that happens as an unfortunate accident, not on purpose, but not the way things are, but an anomaly, so to speak. And I think it puts your mind in a place where you're focused on action rather than avoidance.
There's this mindset it's appealing, but it's a little bit alien to me. And I think that I sense that there is a lot of antecedent knowledge, so concepts, principles
Right.
that are required for you to internalize before you could have this kind of sense of life. And so that was what motivated the question, because
Right.
there's got to be a whole bunch of principles, ideas you would need to think about and accept before you have this. And it seems like it's worth the process of attaining.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just life experience. Like if you've gone through bad situations that weren't even your fault, I think that's part of it too. Like if you, I don't know, if somebody went through life without anything unfortunate happening, they won't need to even think about what accidents are like because they don't happen. They had good
Well,
luck or something. But I think it's a big influence on what experiences you've had.
I think it's the thinking more so. I think the experiences will help you internalize the thinking if you already think that way. They
Yeah.
would help you embody it even more deeply. But if you go through a difficult experience, as I think a lot of people have, if it's I don't think that'll then help you attain this view. I think
Yeah.
you could come out very badly too. So
That's true. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, there is a fair amount of psychology literature on this, actually. There's a couple
And
concepts related.
any that you'd say are what would be most helpful from psychology, that not too academic and dry, but more abstract but
Grit.
practical. Grit.
There's a book called Grit, actually.
Yes, I know it. Angela
That's
Duckworth.
it's a good one. I recommend that book.
Cool.
I've read it.
Have you read any Hercule, I don't know, whatever he's called, and then have you read any Sherlock Holmes and thoughts?
Is Circular Poirot, is that, which writer is that from?
Agatha Christie.
Yeah, I know some of him. I've watched some movies based on her books.
Any thoughts on either of them as far as thinking methods goes? Fictionalized thinking methods.
Well,
Or
Sherlock, as in the books I haven't read,
yeah, okay.
but I think they are great examples of what I heard of um, inductive thinking. Just examples of it, at least written out, at least as a way to ponder what it is to think through problems.
Okay. And then Hercule Poirot or whatever.
Um, I don't have much opinion on him, other than I've enjoyed the movies about him.
Okay. Do you know, have you read any romanticist Spanish authors? Or when I say romanticist, I mean it in the sense Ayn Rand defines it as, which is so specifically extracting that volitional element in fictional romanticist authors.
Um, Authors, I don't know. Don Quixote is a pretty, almost falls into that. I'm not sure,
Okay.
but nothing that I can think of, like
No
from Spain,
Hugo
like him.
equivalent.
Not that I can think of.
Okay.
No.
Not Spain, but Spanish. So
Yeah,
Spanish speaking.
Cervantes. Oh, any Spanish speaking?
Yeah.
Well, I would still say Cervantes, which is Don Quixote. He wrote Don Quixote.
Mm.
But besides him, I'm trying to think anybody in the Spanish speaking world. No, not in that genre. Well, maybe in the way Rand thinks. Let me think for a moment. Not that I can think of. I'm pretty sure there is one, but I don't know any offhand.
All right, let's get into epistemology to finish up.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about propositions and definitions in propositions. So in trying to clarify concepts, I'm defining words, defining concepts by essentials. And I notice myself now, if I'm reading a proposition, the only way the definition is relevant is if I pause, and if I pause on a single individual concept on its own and think through it deliberately and slowly. But as I read a proposition, a sentence, it's like I can't detect any sort of process that is relevant to definitions. I just observe myself seemingly just sort of coalescing everything into one picture or abstraction. And I'm wondering what's going on. I don't know if you've got thoughts on that, but I'm confused then. What's in that case? It doesn't seem, I'm not noticing any role for definition. There's just some kind of process that my subconscious performs, and it all just works automatically, and I can't. Yeah.
Well, the concepts are organized in a more hierarchical manner, more well organized. So just by the fact of reading the word in it, I don't know, your mind activating the concept, it activates more relevant concepts, I think would be the best way to think of it. That all your concepts are better organized, and the definition helps to organize them. So even if you're not recalling the definition at this moment when you're reading, having made the definition made you organize the concepts better. So by the time you're reading and automatically processing these words at a fast speed, then they're already organized in a way that is efficient for your thinking, efficient for your memory. So when you do maybe go back and recall what you wrote, recall what you read, you'll make better associations, more efficient connections, more relevant associations between the different concepts you've read. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah. Have you given any thought to how a badly defined concept affects thinking when the concept is used in a proposition? So one that you have to explain through lots of descriptive sentences, like, oh, okay, the concept understanding is when you can explain a thing in different concepts, or the concept understanding is when you can take a thing and use it. And so holding that kind of those associative descriptions for a concept, have you given any thought to how that affects thinking? Would you just say it's the opposite, I don't know what word to use, the inverse, the reverse of what you just described? It leads to completely inefficient thinking?
Yeah, or at least it makes you take longer to work through ideas. Like the best parallel example I can give is, say when I'm working through something in maybe philosophy, say, or I'll pick an even harder example. Like I've read philosophy and math sometimes, and it's very difficult for me. It's just very abstract and weird concepts. So since I don't really have them organized well yet, like I'm going really slow through it, and maybe it could take me 10 minutes to work through an idea, when otherwise with any other subject it might take me like 2 minutes to go through the same amount of stuff. Like it's that speed of working through things that I don't have as much there, and not as well organized. Or if I do feel messy on a subject, like I feel there's just a lot of info and I don't know how to organize it yet, and it's really unorganized, I feel very lost. Like sometimes when I've learned maybe some courses I've taken, like one was like on, I don't know, just like business software or something, and it was a poorly presented class. It's really just a chaos of concretes, and I couldn't really deal with it. Like I felt like I was memorizing, and I couldn't remember anything. It was a pain and a struggle. Not only that, I didn't really get what I was reading. It's like it's just a mess of words. I didn't get it. Like I just felt so disorganized, and I couldn't get through anything. And that's what it was like, I think, with what it'd be like with lacking definitions. It's not that I couldn't read the words. It was fine to see the words, but I felt like I'd like pause all the time. Like I was like I get confused right away. It's like, wait, what to reread that sentence? Like it's just all around more difficult because I don't have any of the right associations. I don't know what to recall. I don't know what to think of. It's just a mess.
Yeah, I think that's common in those fields, business, economics. There's a lot of noun pylons and just undefined concepts that don't really have any, they're just vague. But anyway, that's separate. Okay, cool. That makes sense. Have you gotten to the point where you're able to identify what concept is causing the issue? Like when you feel a sense of vagueness or when you feel stuck, can you identify if the issue is, for example, ignorance of some knowledge, or if it is a badly defined concept, or if it is, so meaning you already have the knowledge, it's just not organized correctly and tied to the concept? So can you identify what the issue is now when you're stuck? Have you found you've managed to cultivate some kind of improved self-awareness to pinpoint where the issue is, what is causing the issue?
Yes, I think I'm better at least since then, and after many other classes I've taken, I'm better able to identify when what I'm struggling with versus the way it's presented, like whether it's my fault or somebody else's. Like I'm usually good at recognizing what I can fix. And yeah, I think that comes from being able to identify essentials, or better able than I used to, that I can better figure out just where the problem is. It's just getting used to it over time. Like in a way, like if you're good at, I don't know, repairing cars, like eventually you just go quickly to, you can find the problem very fast.
And what about invalid concepts used in a proposition or thought process? What I remember in I think in Opa, Peikoff said something like it invalidates the thought process. Have you given any thought to concretely what it looks like when someone has been has adopted some undefined or invalid concept and how it affects thinking? Like any
At a
firsthand?
minimum, well, there's many kinds, but let's just say invalid in terms of ones that you formed, but it will eventually turn out that they are false, or they're not referring to anything real. But you could say those are mistakes even. And really at best, at a minimum, they will all show like you'll get stuck at some point, that you'll literally be unable to proceed. There's no way past it. And that's the point where you might realize, oh, the concept's wrong. This concept is not describing reality. It's invalid. And that's when you realize you change it.
Can you give an example, or can you think of one?
A lot in science. Think of, say, miasma used to be a theory that miasma caused disease. That is, the quality of the air itself is what caused disease, not germs, but the air. And a bad air makes you sick, and good air makes you well, which isn't any valid concept at all. It's not the air that's itself diseased. It's just germs travel through the air. But anyway, they couldn't use that concept to reason about what causes illness or the spread of illness or all kinds of other outstanding questions about disease spread, that it couldn't explain anything. And it fell by the wayside, that the theory was no good anymore. It wasn't just wrong, it was referring to something that didn't even exist. And germ theory took over after that because it wasn't a barrier to thought, that it was something valid and you could move on to develop better theories. But miasma theory didn't work at all. It was useless. It was a dead end. You couldn't proceed.
So in science, it sounds like part of the process of making progress in discovering what makes up reality is hypothesizing not only about a theory, but about a concept. Would I be right to say that? Like you've got to develop new concepts, and on that basis, you then form hypotheses and theories.
Not quite. I'm just trying to say that at a minimum, invalid concepts will be a dead end. there could be many reasons the invalid concept was formed, and maybe you could say it was bad scientific method to begin with. Theories, well, that's more a deeper question. When do you propose a new concept versus building on something that you have already? I think it depends on um, it probably depends on, like we were talking about the other day, yesterday, about integrating some observations. You might observe some new observations you don't know how to take into account of, that you don't know how to integrate them. There's a new phenomena you see, you don't know what to do with it. You need to create some integration so you can form a concept in the meantime, or an attempt at a concept. And it is, oh, I think they're integrated this way. So you integrate them, then do studies based on that integration. And then you can verify if that concept is valid. You can verify if you can really, in fact, trace this concept to things happening in reality, or are you misidentifying something? Are you just identifying actually a new aspect of something that you already knew about? Or is this really something new you've observed? And that's the sort of process you need to go through. Like figuring out, do I need to create new integrations? And if so, how do I validate them?
Okay.